Welcome back to Fast Politics, Charlie Sykes.
Hey, sorry that we don't have anything to talk about today.
Unbelievable. So,
Unbelievable.
we got this dump of photos. I'm going to read to you from the Daily Mail because whenever you think that the Daily Mail is just fun gossip, it's always worth remembering that it's in fact right-wing paplum.
Yeah.
Democrats selectively released the images from a collection of 95,000 from the estate. Selectively. But they selected the one with Bill Clinton in it?
Yeah, look, that's kind of the White House spin, but at least they're not saying that they're fake or they're phony. But
Mhm.
it's never a good thing when your picture is taken associated with Epstein. And you and I have talked about this. There's a reason why Donald Trump and Mike Johnson fought so hard not to have these files released.
Mm.
This is just not a good thing for anybody's reputation. I mean, look, so Bill Clinton's in there and Prince Andrew's in there. And Steve Bannon, by the way, how has Steve Bannon not been roped into this thing earlier? I mean, the
And
the blast radius keeps getting bigger and bigger, doesn't it?
they're taking mirror selfies of Steve Bannon and Jeff Epp focusing on each other in the mirror.
Completely innocent, nothing going on here, nothing to see. So, again, what's the fallout on this? I don't know. It's kind of funny. Right before we began taping, I got this call from my daughter who lives in France, who says, "Dad, what is this Epstein thing about? What's the fallout going to be?" And I said, I hadn't actually seen the dump yet, but internationally, people are all wondering. That's the big question. Does this go anywhere? Have we seen anything we didn't see before? And
Oh,
there's something about having the pictures that, again, if you're any politician other than Donald Trump, could be career ending, but then it's Donald Trump.
I think that it's pretty interesting. Bill Gates and Woody Allen are in a lot of the pictures, but the picture that I wanted to talk about was this picture. The president is seen posing with 6 women whose identities have all been redacted. And that feels like just a really important bit to talk about because if you think about even if you had, I mean, Gavin Newsom ate at French Laundry.
Right. We
He
all know
got
that.
yeah, they had a recall election.
Hmm.
Like, talk to me about in the years of covering and also being someone who has lived in the Republican spaces. I mean, what Trump has, I mean, there aren't even Republican politicians who could do this.
No, there's not. And you have to go back to October 7th, 2016. That was the date that the Access Hollywood video was released. And back in that, kinder, gentler time, everybody thought that that would be career ending because for any other politician, it would be. A lot of Republicans backed away. But Molly, you know what's happened since then. You've had Republicans who swallowed one thing after another. And look, a lot of this stuff is baked in. This is a party that stuck with the guy who bragged about grabbing women by the private parts and having
Yeah.
sex with the wives of his friends, and obviously the jury finding him liable for sexual assault didn't faze them. The what is it, 2 dozen women who've come forward and saying he molested them. So this is part of the thing, is that, I mean, you've known that Donald Trump has been a horn dog for
Yeah.
decades.
Right.
So what pushes it across the line for Republicans? Quite frankly, I almost can't imagine what it would be unless you actually catch him on flagrante with an underage girl, and I'm not even sure that would do it for some of these folks.
Yeah, I mean, I also think you don't necessarily need to have, like, JD Vance disavow Trump, that's never happening, but
Never
if
gonna
you
happen.
just can chip away at 10%, 5%, people who go like, "This guy told me QAnon was real," and all of a sudden now I'm seeing pictures of him with Jeffrey Epstein and all these women with their face redacted.
Well, and of course, the big irony is that it was Trump world that elevated this story to where it is. I mean, the
Yeah.
reason we're talking about this is because for years they were talking about this ring of pedophiles and sex traffickers, and this was going to be the big thing. And you had Cash Patel and Dan Bongino saying we're going to release those files. And
Mhm.
earlier this year, do you remember earlier this year, Pam Bondi was going to release them. So
Mhm.
they have been the hype squad on these Epstein files for years, and now, well, there's kind of a weird karma going on here. Again, look, the appetite of Republicans for breaking with Trump, continues to be limited. Although, look, that vote on the Epstein, releasing the Epstein files, was kind of a break the glass moment, even for people like Marjorie Taylor Greene. I mean, you trace back that moment when things started cracking, that would be it.
Yeah.
And you're seeing more and more. I mean, every day I'm reading about Republicans signing discharge petitions or defying Trump. I mean, it's still small. It's still,
But
still straws in the wind, but it's
Indiana,
happening. That's a
Indiana.
that's a big
Oh,
fucking deal. I'm sorry. That is a
yeah.
big story. Yeah.
Let's talk about that. We had 21 Republicans vote with the Democrats against this partisan redistricting, which Trump had sent JD Vance there twice.
Well, and the level of threats can't be overstated. I mean, do you see that thing from Heritage Action where they basically said the president's made it clear that if you don't do what he wants, he's going to cut off all federal funds to the state of Indiana. You have the White House basically extorting an entire state that if you don't give me this political win, I'm going to cut off your road aid, close down your National Guard, the guard centers and all of these things, whether it was Coast Guard, I don't know what it was. But, it occurs to me that before we get to Republican courage, we've been so numb that this act of raw political extortion isn't considered a crime in and of itself. I mean, who threatens an entire state because of political actions? But these Republicans stood up to Donald Trump. They defied Donald Trump. And I think one of the keys is that his bullying tactics backfired. And number two, there were a bunch of them, as you point out. This was collective action. And that's the thing that we've been missing in terms of the Republicans creating critical mass of Republicans willing to stand up against him. Trump can pick off one or two. If it's just Liz Cheney or just Adam Kinzinger, he can take them on. But when it starts to be 20 state
Right,
senators, they
right.
kind of got each other's back. So this was a huge defeat for Donald Trump, and it's a reminder to other Republicans. You know what? You actually can say no to him. You can tell Donald Trump to stuff it.
Yeah, I think it's a really important point. And, when you talk to experts on authoritarianism, they always say something to that effect, right? Like
Hmm.
one person is going to be easy to,
Yeah.
go around, but 20. And that's the thing about the universities. If you're negotiating just with Harvard, that's one thing. But if you're
Yeah.
negotiating with all the Ivies or all the state schools, and I think that is what we're seeing. The only successful way to push back against Trumpism is in mass.
That's right. And I think that, look, a lot of Trump's power this year has been based on the perception that he was irresistible. That
Mhm.
I mean, that's what the law firms told themselves. That's what the
Right.
universities were telling themselves. That's what Republicans. And the moment you begin to realize, maybe he can't do all of this stuff, that power begins to fade. Now, again, you know that I always caution against irrational exuberance.
Right.
He still is unchained. He still is moving at ramming speed. But
Yes.
in terms of
Correct.
raw authoritarianism, the way in which he uses blackmail and extortion to force governments and private companies to bend to his will. I'm guessing that somewhere in Budapest, Viktor Orban is thinking, shit, why didn't I do that sooner? Why didn't I think of that sort of
Yeah.
thing?
Yeah.
And this is not theoretical. This is actually happening and has happened. We've already crossed those red lines.
Yeah. Yeah. I think that's a really good point. And I also think it's important to remember that the what happened with the law firms was sort of corporate lawyers worried about they were going to lose clients, right? That other
Yeah,
people were going to
yeah,
get their
yeah.
clients. And
Hmm.
then what happened with the businesses was, tech bros who wanted government approvals, regulatory approvals, either for technology building or for mergers. So it is like the people who have really behaved in the most craven ways are people who were incentivized by capitalism to some extent. Not that
Right.
I'm
Yeah.
anti-capitalist.
No, they were, and they could tell themselves with some reason that this was the smart play. You get billion
Right.
dollar deals approved, you get corporate welfare, you get a whole bunch of stuff. But this sort of thing, paying off and buying off the White House is the smart move until it's not the smart move. I thought, and I've said this before, so I'm sorry to repeat myself. What I thought was very interesting when Jamie Dimon, the CEO of JP
Mhm.
Morgan, said, we're not contributing to that big golden ballroom because there might come a time when there's a Department of Justice that's not controlled by Donald Trump, might be controlled by Democrats, and they might come back to us and say, that looks like you were trying to buy influence. There may be a time when this sort of thing, might not look like the smart move. In fact, might put you in some sort of legal jeopardy. I thought that was an interesting development that people
Mhm.
began to think, this is not forever. You may think that you've gamed the system, but Donald Trump is not going to be there forever handing out the fear and favor and the grift and all of those things. So again, I don't know. But the story in Indiana, the kinds of threats, the kind of pressure that was brought against them, and the fact that they stood up and said no.
Yeah.
And you can see that that Trump knows that's a huge defeat
Yeah.
because the rage in MAGA, the threats from JD Vance
Yeah.
are pretty unhinged.
But also good on Jamie Dimon for saying
Yeah.
that because, have seen so many really well, I mean, the richest man in the world, right?
Yeah.
And Mark Zuckerberg, people who, and even like Jeff Bezos, who could
Yep.
easily have said no, is like now the Washington Post just covers free markets.
There's so much free markets from Donald Trump.
I
No, I
yeah,
mean, look, I mean, I feel like we've had this discussion before, but I mean, these are people who have fuck you money. And yet when
right.
it came right down to it, instead of saying fuck you, they said, oh, yes, sir. Yes, sir. May I
Yeah.
have another one? And that unfortunately also creates that collective action that when the rich guys look around going, well, if you're not going to stand up against him, I'm not going to stand up against him. I mean, this is again, what happened in Indiana was
Right.
you did have collective action critical mass. If you had that with the universities, if you had that with the law firms, if you had that with civil society, Donald Trump would not have been able to do a lot of things he's done or plans to do in the future. So it's really important to keep emphasizing that you can't leave these guys alone twisting in the wind.
Right, exactly, and that they are meaningful and important, and what they did was meaningful and
Yeah.
important, and in many ways braver than Liz Cheney, because Liz Cheney is a big celebrity who lives
Yeah.
in Washington, DC. These guys are like just like state legislators who are not making a gazillion dollars, who cannot afford necessarily to have, they're not gonna get a book deal. They're not gonna, be on television shows.
Yeah, and they don't care about it. I mean, these are Midwestern Hoosiers.
Right.
And, and maybe that's why they were willing to say no because they had less to lose. I mean, the thing about Donald Trump is he's figured out I can bully the people who have the most to lose. If you're a legend, I don't, by the way, even know how much an Indiana senator gets paid. I'm guessing it's not a lot of money.
Yeah, that's what
And
I
and,
think.
and these guys have families, they have homes, they have businesses, they have lives. And many of them might think, you know what? I just don't need this. I just don't need this stuff.
I wonder when we talk about this and the redistricting, we saw this on Tuesday with some of the elections.
Yeah.
There is a real chance that there will be dummy mandering happening, that with how unpopular Trumpism is, right? I mean, we could see this redistricting actually end up helping Democrats.
Actually, that could happen. I mean, this would be one of the great ironies, right? That this thing could boomerang on them, because one of the things they're doing is they were assuming as they were redrawing those lines that the electoral trends that you saw in 2024 are going to continue. They're not. They're being reversed right now. Also, part of the problem is that, and Republicans are starting to realize this, you're watering down, by breaking up some of these Democratic districts, you are watering down the margin in a Republican district. So here's the number I gave David French when we did a podcast. Said, let's say you have a 60% Republican district, solid, safe Republican seat, right? You don't have to worry about the general election. But if you water that down as part of this gerrymandering and it becomes, say, a 54%, 53% district, that's a swing district now. And you're seeing swings of 10, 11, 12, 13 points or more. If you begin to apply that, you suddenly realize that it doesn't matter how much of this game playing you do. You are facing a wipeout if you continue to, I don't know, cling to these policies that the American people are going, you know what? I didn't vote for this. I voted for the
Right.
guy in the ad. I didn't vote for the guy who was, blithering and making these threats at the rally. I didn't see the rally. I saw the ads and he was going to bring down prices. He was going to make America strong. He was going to secure the border. And he seemed like a substantive guy. And now a lot of Americans are going, "Wait, wait, wait. This is not what I thought." And I think you're seeing that in the numbers. I mean, this is not just anecdotal. You're seeing it in one election after another. And Molly, correct me if I'm wrong, he's down to a 31% approval rating on the economy in the new AP poll. 31%?
And also, one of the other things that I think is so interesting about this moment is so the places where he has managed to do better
Yeah.
have been the economy or do better. He has had a
Yeah.
better the
Yeah.
public has thought of
Yeah.
him
Yeah.
as better at, we know the truth, but is the economy and also immigration, right? The idea wasn't actually, I'd love to talk to you about this for a minute because
Yeah.
the idea was that the people were mad about the border under Biden, okay,
Yes.
and that Trump that he has cut down on a lot of immigration, which we know there aren't people coming over the border. We don't He's not deporting at the same levels as Obama because he's actually incompetent, but he is definitely has less people coming here for obvious reasons. They're not even coming for
Yeah.
visits. That's one of the reasons. But I wonder if you could just talk through, like, as we see this, he is now underwater on immigration too. And we're even seeing, soccer moms in Illinois talking about abolishing ICE. So
Yes.
make it make sense.
Okay, well, it doesn't make sense. The interesting thing about that is that, he could have made that a complete winner by basically saying, "Okay, I've secured the border, and then we're going to enforce deportation the way my predecessors have." He doesn't have to say that. He's going to say, the biggest, but you don't have to be cruel about it.
Hmm.
I mean, honestly, I think that you can be a bouncer at a bar, you can be a cop, you can be an ICE agent, you can be a National Guardsman. You don't need to be a performative asshole. And so what people are seeing is they're seeing this kind of cruelty and going, well, that doesn't seem necessary to me. Now,
Hmm.
MAGA kind of loves the cruelty porn of people being thrown to the ground and stomped and windows being broken, but I don't think that's what the soccer moms in Illinois are thinking about this. So he has squandered what should have been his best issue, and he's going to make it worse
Yeah.
because he's pumped 150 billion more dollars over the next 4 years into ICE. That will make ICE better funded than most of the world's militaries, including Israel's. And who do you think? And they're hiring 10,000 new agents. And Molly, who do you think is signing up for ICE right now? And how do you think they're being trained? So, do you think this is going to become more prudent? Do you think this is going to become kinder? You think they're going to pivot away from the cruelty? No. What
No.
happens when they run out of the, worst of the worst? So this is an own goal, I think, by Donald Trump. And again, it is a legitimate position to say we need to secure the border. And if you are a criminal, you should be put in prison or deported. That's what people thought Donald Trump was going to do. And now, and for the last few months, they have been seeing something I think that offends the innate sense of fairness and dignity. And
Yeah.
that's that Stephen Miller, fetish for being as brutal as possible.
The other thing is, they're clearly upset. The tariffs are clearly unpopular,
Yeah.
and that's why his economic numbers are down.
Well, also, look, people have a lived reality, and this is something we talked about during the Biden years. You can say, and by the way, don't confuse cost of living with inflation rates. Cost of living is how much things cost, and things cost a lot more than they cost 5 years ago. And so if the inflation rate is down, which is not necessarily, it just means that the cost of living is rising at a slower rate, but people are
Mm.
still screwed. And so
Uh-huh.
Donald Trump, and again, I think he's tone deaf on this issue, which is weird because this is basically
Yeah.
all the marbles. That whole going to Pennsylvania, mocking affordability, and then doing his Marie Antoinette, cosplaying like, yeah, I am a billionaire who's building a golden ballroom, but you people don't need more than two dolls or pencils. And what the hell is with that? So if Republicans think there's going to be a pivot by Donald Trump, a come to Jesus moment for Donald Trump, I think it's going to dawn on them soon that they are royally screwed because Donald Trump just doesn't get it, and is not willing to do it. And plus, the tariffs, which he believes in religiously, art continue to hammer American consumers.
Yeah. Charlie Sykes, I hope he'll come back.
Anytime.